So my name's Suzanne Freed, and I've been working as a psychic medium formally since about probably 2005. But I was trained to do mediumship and psychic work when I was in my 30s. But I decided instead to go to grad school and become a psychotherapist. It's sort of similar, SPSY, and not a bad joke. And but after 25 years doing therapy, I decided to just launch full-time into doing psychic mediumship work, and I really love doing it. The door to the other side, I'll tell you a little bit about that. So my brother passed away from AIDS in the early years of the pandemic, when AIDS was killing everybody. And I had, after Richie died, well, I was actually sitting by his body in the hospital, and I felt I was facing him. I'd gotten off the bed, and I felt something tap me on the shoulder, and there was no one in the room but me. And I looked at Richie again, and I went, okay. And I looked in the corner of the hospital room, and it was blazing with golden light. And it was the afternoon, and the shades were drawn, and I knew it wasn't light from the sunshine. And I really felt like I was being given some kind of gift to know my brother was okay. He was my baby brother, and we were really close. So fast forward a few months later, I was driving home from a grief group that I was in because I needed support, and the whole car flooded with my brother's cologne. He used to wear polo cologne like most gay men did back in the 80s. And I felt like it was him saying, "You're okay, even though you're sad." And so I began having more and more experiences of my brother in spirit. And my mom, who was really psychic too, but more afraid of it, we were talking one day on the phone because she lived in New York, and she said, I felt Richie the other day when I was doing the dishes, and he would come and hang out with her in the kitchen when he was alive and visit with her. That was his favorite place to sit with her and chat. And so for me, it was like the door swung open to the other side from my own, family. And then you fast forward to when I started doing readings again in 2005, and I gave a reading to this woman, regular psychic. So that means I'm just reading the energy just to see what's going on in your life, picking up the blocks that I might see. Like if someone's grieving, I might see an image of the heart broken. And then suddenly I hear an Irish brogue in my head, and I'm like, what? And this voice was a male voice, Irish brogue, and I'm like, oh my, and of course I'm not showing her my, like, what the hell? I'm just going, oh. So I said to her, I'm hearing a male voice with an Irish brogue, and I said, is that your father? And she started to cry, and her father had passed away like X years ago, and he had some messages for her. And as soon as she left, I called my best friend. I said, you'll never guess what happened, because it was freaking me out. I felt like Whoopi in Ghost, except I'm not a charlatan, but it was like, oh my God. So the door opened to the other side. And so my regular readings could still happen, but there were times when spirit would come through. And I thought, wow. I mean, I feel like it's a gift, because I used to, I specialized in working in grief and loss in my practice as a therapist, and I would run grief groups. And for me, doing mediumship work is like an extension, because most people come because they want assurances that their person's okay over there. And so for me, it's a real gift to be able to go to that place and bring information back. But the good thing is my hair is nicer than the Long Island mediums. But she's famous and I'm not.
So why do you think your powers were given to you?
That's a great question. Well, I think there's two ways to answer that. I think the first thing is kind of what I said. I feel like the door opened because I needed support to go on. When Richie passed away, I was really depressed, and I really didn't want to be alive. And I also knew that I had a life to lead without my baby brother. So for me, when the door opened to getting messages from Richie and feeling his presence around quite, distinctly, it was for me like an encouragement, like, I'm here, even though I'm not in the body. You can do your life. You don't have to feel guilty that you're alive and I'm not. So when it began to change for other people, I believe in the divinity. You can call it higher power, God, whatever. And I feel like I was being used to sort of expand what I had already done as a therapist, which is to help people to find a way to cope with their overwhelming sense of loss and grief. So it sort of almost made sense. Well, why not? I'm doing psychic work. Why wouldn't this door open too? Because not all psychics are mediums. And there is a differentiation between that. I have a colleague who is a psychic and also a medium. But I know psychics where they're not getting in touch with the other side. So for me, I think it's like God said, well, Suzanne, you already know how to work with grief and loss. Let's expand what you do and what you can give to people when they come see you.
Okay. So psychic does not necessarily contact the dead, unlike a medium? Right.
So a medium really means it's a medium. So it's like the medium could be, the microphone's a medium, right? So a medium is sort of a connection tube, from the other side to the present, to here we are sitting in this room. A psychic will, when I do psychic work, so I'll just tune in and I'll get an image of what's going on for the people, and maybe I'll, hear, oh, they're taking a big leap in their work, and so I see I'm clairaudient and voyant, so I hear my information and I see lots of images when I do a reading. The difference for me is, so not all psychics open to that side, and I don't feel like I did anything special to make it happen, but what'll happen is there'll be images and I'll still hear things, but it's sort of a sense of knowing it's somebody. They're always on my left side for some reason. I don't even know what that means. Probably nothing. But I can sense them over here. I don't see dead people like some mediums actually see people hanging out, and I don't want to because it would scare me. So there's a way that door just opens, and suddenly I'm getting information. And in the early years when I was new at it, I would say, well, I'm seeing, and then, or someone would come to me and say, I want to contact whoever. And for instance, I had a woman come and she said her lover had dropped dead suddenly of a cardiac arrest. And she said, is he writing poetry on the other side? And I'm like, I don't know, So I close my eyes and I see this giant, like in a museum, a bust with a white cloth over it. And the cloth lifts up and there's William Shakespeare. And I said, I'm seeing a bust of William Shakespeare. And then she started to cry and she said, he taught Shakespeare for 25 years at the university. And I had no way of knowing that. So I'm kind of drifting away from your question, but that's kind of how it happens.
That's okay, that's interesting. If you don't mind me asking, who are the majority of your clients?
Female. Probably 90% are women. They range in age. So from their 20s into their 60s. The oldest client I had was an elderly woman who was close to 90. Her daughter had a reading with me, and the daughter's father came through, which was her mom's husband. So she wanted her mom to have a reading. So she was my oldest client. But typically, the range is from 20s into their 60s. And sometimes people will come for a regular psychic reading, and then somebody comes through anyway, and we talk about that. Do you want me to break it down in the other way too?
No, it's fine.
Yeah, okay.
That's interesting that it's mostly women, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, as a therapist, I'm a woman, so I would attract probably more female clients. But when I look at all the healers I know, there's a small percentage of men that are open to a lot of this kind of stuff and a lot of doing self, growth and stuff like that. And I think it just reflects that. The men that come are usually males who are really open to wanting to explore things other than the concrete world. And oftentimes many of my clients are sensitive themselves. They have had psychic experiences too, and sometimes people will come because they want some guidance on how to slow that down or what to do with it. So I try to teach them what little I feel I know about the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay. So do you believe it is possible to fairly test scientific powers using scientific methods?
Like bring someone into the lab? Yeah, that's an interesting question. So in college I took a class in psychic phenomenon, and we did remote viewing. It was a huge lecture hall, like there were 100 of us. And they had teams go out into the field to send back images, like to go places and then think they're to us and to see who received it in the room. Well, a lot of us started having images, and what turned out was there was a package of photographs that was left on the podium. So some of us were reading the package, and some people were receiving information from the people out in the field doing remote viewing. So in a way, I feel like that was a test, because none of us knew, and it wasn't done on purpose, they forgot. So I think there is a way to measure it. But there are skeptics everywhere, and I feel like it's not my job to worry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a great question. Sense. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how do you tell if psychics are genuine or charlatans?
Well, I don't know if you saw my website, but I have a big thing about the ethics of my work, and mostly it comes from having heard horrible stories from people who come to see me. So one of the first things that will help you know that someone is not real is if they pump you for information before they meet you or when they meet you. I read cold, so when my client comes in, I don't want them to tell me anything but their name. And then I sit down and I get impressions, and in the beginning they can be general. Like today, the woman who just preceded you, it was like I saw her heart broken and a little Band-Aid over the heart, but I felt like the Band-Aid was being lifted on and off. And I said, feels like there's a breakup, but it's not. I feel like there's still contact happening, and it's sort of making your grief worse because it's not getting time to heal. And she started crying, and she said, yeah, I'm trying to set boundaries with this person, and it's not working, and we broke up just 2 months ago. So a real psychic wouldn't want to know what was their name and when did it happen. You would be able to just start reading without knowing anything. And it's not because I want to prove anything to clients, it's just because I want a clean slate to see. And there are times when I'm not the right reader for people and I'm not able to get in there. So that can happen too, and maybe 1% of my work it has happened. But it's also because sometimes people think they're open and they're not, and that's okay. I don't shame a client and say it's you. I say, oh, it's me, I'm not the right reader, and I give them referrals and I don't charge them. So someone who's a charlatan will do that, and also want you to come back to clear dark energy and ask you for a lot more money. So a lot of these people you see out on the streets here, like there's about 6 blocks away, there's a $15 card reader, and there's one down in the other direction in Berkeley, and I've heard stories about some of them where you come in and get the cheap reading, and then it's like, well, I need to clear all the dark energy because that's why you can't find a girl or boyfriend. And people are vulnerable when they go to see a reader, especially if they're grieving. And I met a woman once who gave $15,000 to someone who ripped her off. So it happens because people can prey on them, and they do, you know. I can tell you stories if you want to hear another one.
So how much would you charge for a reading?
So I have a scale between $150 to $175 an hour, but I also have on my website that if people are poor students or if they're single parents or if they're on Social Security or SSI, to let me know. And I have found that the only way to work that out is to be upfront. So I tell people I need to know their monthly income and who's supporting them. I had a woman want a really low fee, and it turns out she was on a 6-figure income. Now maybe for her she was struggling, but I have given readings to single moms who work at $9 an hour jobs. I'm not going to charge them that kind of money. I don't advertise it, but I'll see people and give them $50, have them give me $50 for a reading, because I just know that I have a gift to share, and I know that it's a middle class privilege to be able to come see me because of my fees, but I'm also really open to giving back. It was like having low fee sliding scale when I was a therapist too, so that's important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when you hear of psychics doing readings, they constantly say energy. So what exactly does this mean?
I don't know. So I believe that what we are, it's sort of like quantum physics. We're made up of energy. We're not just this body. My work is called Envelopes of God, and what it really means is I believe these bodies are just like an envelope we've been given. Like in this lifetime, I'm Suzanne, and the contents are what our talents are, and our challenges, and all the stuff that makes up our personality and our persona. So for me, I don't see colors when I read people. Some people see colors and auras. But to me, the energy is the life force energy. It's your chi. It's also... so when I say the energy is blocked, so the other day I was reading someone and my throat closed up. And so I felt like there was a blockage in her throat chakra. Do you know what the chakras are? They're the energy points in our body. So for me, in that reading, I said to her, well, it feels like you're not owning your voice. But I didn't literally get an image of her speaking. It was more just feeling a sense of the energy around her throat closing up. So it's sort of, to me, the energy is what we're composed of. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So could you tell us a little bit about the afterlife and your thoughts on it?
Well, I don't have a full picture. A couple of things I think. I think that when we first cross over, if we've been ill, that we have a time where we rest and we sort of have to regroup. Like my father just passed away, and people are saying, do you hear from him? And I really have the sense that if I'm going to hear from him, it's not going to be now, because I feel like he needs to just rest. I also believe that we work on the other side, air quotes, but it's like, so some people, when my brother passed away, I went to see a psychic about a year or two later, and the guy said, your brother's very busy helping people cross over who have AIDS. And a second person told me that too, so I felt it was very valid. So I feel like we go over there, and at some point we do some work, and I feel like it's about helping our soul grow, because I think we're on the planet here for soul growth too, and so I don't think it stops when we cross over. I don't think we sit around in white robes playing the harp. I think that's a very Judeo-Christian kind of concept, because I think we're divine, and I think that our work is to get more in touch with our inner divinity and to see it in each other on the planet. So my feeling is when we go up there, well, I want to eat French fries when I go up there. That's really what I want to do. And but we're disembodied, so I think that we are reunited with the people we loved. I think it's like a quantum physics kind of thing, where even though they might have incarnated, there's still a part of them that we can still relate to from this lifetime. And so I think we're with family, and I think we're probably born into groups of souls where, like, we meet the same people each lifetime in a different role so that we can work out stuff. And I think there's a lot of, I don't believe in, the way I feel is like when you die, I feel like we watch a video of our lives to see where we weren't so skillful, the places where we might have hurt ourselves and others. And then we get to see it all unfold, so we remember that, so that when we come back and incarnate, which I do believe in, that we kind of bring that knowledge with us and hopefully have a better life where we do less harm. That's kind of how I see it.
Okay. Yeah, so I notice most readings predict really positive futures. Do you ever read someone and then see like some like cancer or something, just not want to tell them?
Well, first of all, I'm not a medical intuitive, so I don't focus a lot on health stuff with folks. If stuff comes up, it'll be more like saying, oh, it looks like all your stress is in your tummy, so it'd be good for you to do some acupuncture or something like that. So I don't get predictions around like what's going to unfold with your health. And even when I get a hit of the future on just a generic level, like, oh, July's lit up, I think there's going to be some shift. We have free will, so I also believe that there's that. My readings, what I say to people, because sometimes people are very nervous when they come, and that's understandable, and they might say, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to hear bad stuff. And I'm like, there's nothing bad. They're all lessons for our growth, even if they're really horrible and hard in terms of health or losing people. So I look at it as all just information. But I don't get those kinds of readings where I see disaster or don't do this because something's going to happen. I never pick that up. Years ago, I had a couple of experiences of premonitions where people died, and I said to Spirit, I don't want them anymore because they're no good to me. Because what use is it for me to know if I can't help somebody with that information? And it stopped, and I was relieved. I had a premonition in 1980 whenever Ronald Reagan was shot here in San Francisco. I woke up that morning and I thought, oh God, he's going to be shot. And I thought, now what am I going to do? Call the FBI, they'll arrest me. So I did nothing with it. I went to work, and then in the afternoon the radio was on and we all heard someone try to shoot Ronald Reagan. And I didn't tell anyone because I wasn't really comfortable with that stuff back then. So for me, it was like, I don't want to know that kind of future stuff. But it's a great question, and when I've had readings done on myself from other psychics, they haven't told me anything negative. They might say, oh, you might be getting gallstones, you need to like figure out what to do, things like that, more in a gentle kind of way, because it's not about scaring people. It's just, I think different readers pick up different stuff.
What would you say to anyone skeptic of your abilities?
Well, I think healthy skepticism is good. Because if you're sitting in the room with someone who seems like they're not real, then leave the room, I think for skeptics who don't believe in an afterlife or who don't believe this is real, and I just don't think there's anything you can say to them because they're really in their dogma about what their reality is. So what would be my purpose in arguing them out of it, right? I know it's real. I see the healing it brings for people. And I think for me that's the true test of what my gift is. Because how would I know your Uncle Charlie wore, smoked cigars and wore brown hats? I mean, if those things come out and they hit the mark for a client, to me that's the test of it. The few times that I have read people who weren't open, the door's shut. I can't get in there at all. And it's not because they're skeptical. As I said earlier, they're just closed. But I think to try and work with a skeptic wouldn't go anywhere because you have to have a sense of openness for me to be able to come in and see things about you. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I know if I could talk to, had that same gift, it would be kind of daunting. So do you think it's more of a gift or kind of a curse?
Like a burden? Well, I think about the Long Island medium because she claims that if she didn't do what she does, which is she has no boundaries about it, she walks down the street, she sees you in the yogurt store and then says, oh my God, your dead grandmother's hanging out. she said she would get depressed if she didn't do her readings spontaneously. I keep a lid on it, and I keep it back. Like when I leave here, I'm not interested in walking down the street and reading strangers because it's, first of all, it gets tiring, and why would I want to? It's intrusive. So for me, it's not a burden, it's a gift. I think on more the physical plane, learning how to manage my energy, like I can see 3 clients in a day, and that's about it. I don't really want to see 4 or 5 because it's too much work for me. So I like to do what makes me feel comfortable. I think it would be a burden if it scared me. If it was like I was suddenly seeing things like that would like frighten me, like, oh, nuclear holocaust, So for me, it's all a gift. It doesn't feel burdensome at all. And I think because I let myself also shut it off in terms of reading people, that it becomes it's part of my vocation. I feel called to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other general stories you feel are interesting to tell?
So one day I was getting ready for work, and I was pulling my work clothes out of my closet. I used to have an office in San Francisco where I do therapy, and I felt my brother's presence really strongly. And I turned around and I looked at the corner of the bed and I went, "Richie?" And of course he didn't say anything. Well, 5 days later I had an appointment with this guy who's now famous, Hans King, and he wasn't famous then. He was doing readings on the weekend at like a business park. He'd rent an office. And I sat down and just told him my name, and he said, "Oh, you have a brother in spirit," like before I even said anything. And then he said, "Oh, he comes often and sits on the edge of your bed." And I was like, whoa. Because even though I knew it, it was like such validation that I really felt Richie there. So it's kind of like that. And I think when I tell people about their people being around, many people feel it. I had a client call me. We did a phone reading for half an hour. I never met her. She said, books are coming off the bookshelves in my house. I have a 2-year-old toddler crawling around. And 3 a.m., my iPhone turned itself on and started taking pictures. She said, "I don't know what's going on, but it's scaring me." So I dropped in, and I said, "You have a friend, a man in spirit that's like a friend?" And I said, "What happened 2 years ago?" She said, "Oh," and then she told me his name, which I don't remember. She said, "Oh, he passed away." I said, "Well, you think?" She goes, "Yeah, I was wondering how he was." I said, "Well, he's come over to like let you know, so that's him doing all this stuff." So we had a conversation with him, via me, and she called me. I didn't ask her to, but she called me about a week later. She said everything stopped because she was wondering how he was. So he came through to let her know, but he was overzealous and kind of like, "Oh, let me throw books off the shelf and scare the crap out of you at 3 a.m. So, to me, those stories are just more validation that it's all really, like the veil's this thin. They're really there. We can't feel them, but, they're there.
So why do you think science has never been able to prove beyond any doubt the existence of these powers?
I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. Maybe because things still have to have a level of mystery to them. I mean, quantum physics to me is mystical. Quantum physicists are mystics. And the way they see the world blows me away. They can quantify it and prove it, and I don't understand what they're talking about with waves and particles and stuff, but I feel like it's in that realm somewhere of the mystical, which makes it sound even more woo-woo. So how do you quantify it? There was a study done where they weighed people's bodies after they died, and they lost, like, I think 1/4 of an ounce or half, because they believe the soul has weight. Now, we know when we pass away, our bodies become literally dead weight. And I think it's the soul that activates us so that we are light in terms of, So I don't know the answer to why they can't fully quantify it, but you might want to talk to Lloyd.
So you mentioned earlier that you had clairaudio and clairvoyance.
Right, clairaudience and clairvoyance, right.
So you receive this information in the form of images and sounds.
Right, I hear words and phrases in my head.
So when someone comes in here, do you, how exactly, do you actively try to communicate with someone related to them, or does it just sort of happen?
So 2 weeks ago I had 2 people come in, and I knew they wanted a mediumship reading, which means they weren't really interested in the here and now and like what's going on in their lives that needs to be looked at, yada yada. So I did a bit of a psychic reading first because I just had to kind of get grounded. So they were each sitting, one in this chair and one in the other chair. And so at some point I was drawn towards the person sitting in this chair, and because I don't remember my readings, I can't give you too much, and also it's confidential, I feel. But I began to say something, and I began to feel pressure on my head. And I said, "Was this person shot?" because they didn't tell me anything. I just knew, and I didn't even know their relationship. I didn't know how they were related to each other, the two people who had come. And so the woman said yes, and then I went, oh my God, was this person murdered? And then they both started to cry. So I knew nothing. I just knew that they had come for something around wanting to contact someone on the other side. And I began to have a physical experience of a lot of pressure on the side of my head, which is where the person was shot. So, but in a regular reading where it's psychic, suddenly I might hear maternal grandmothers here. And I'll say to the person, did you have a maternal grandmother that was important to you growing up? And they might say, they usually say yes, or whatever, paternal, it depends on what comes through. And then with one client, I saw a whole tray of, this was a client with a Mexican background, and I saw a whole tray filled with some kind of sweet that was important in her heritage. And I said, oh, I'm seeing blah, blah, blah. And, and I always say, I wish it was real because then I'd be on TV. But so that just floats in. The image was there of the food on the tray. And then a few days ago, I did give a reading, I still remember. And this person was from another country. And I said, oh, I'm seeing blah, blah. And she said, oh, my God, my grandmother made that for me all the time. So that's how the images come.
So do you ever, ask specific questions, or does it just sort of information that comes out?
Well, I can't always get names, so sometimes names will come, and I'll say, oh, was this name, and I'll say a name, and they'll go, oh, yeah, that was my Uncle Joe, whatever. And sometimes I don't get a name, so I'll ask the client for the name of the person who's on the other side, and then in my head, I'll use the person's name and say, okay, Sarah, what have you got to say here today, to Jesse? And then that will sometimes give more permission for the voice to come through.
So when in those situations, is there, if you say, I don't know, you're just asking a specific question to a specific person, is there ever, do you find that there's a sort of a minimum response time or an average time it takes for a response?
Sometimes they don't respond. I'm not always 100% able to get, and sometimes it's really quick. Like yesterday, someone asked me what their person's thought about something, and instantly I heard like a 2-word response, and I didn't understand what it meant, but I said it, and the person started cracking up laughing, my client, because that was what this person said all the time about this other person's relationship. So it can be really quick, and sometimes they're just not there. They just kind of wafted in, like on a very slight level, just to let my client know they're supported on the other side, but they don't have a lot to say.
So when you hear words or sounds, is it ever, do you find there's any interference or static type thing where it's unclear what they're saying or what you say?
What's unclear most of all for me will be sometimes the names. So I might hear like a Ma, and then it turns out the name was like Molly, but I won't hear the full name. But other than that, it's pretty clear. The other way that spirit will use me is I call myself a human jukebox, and so since I'm a baby boomer, the database they use is the songs that I knew growing up in the 60s, and so sometimes they'll pick a song and it'll be something symbolic that I then have to figure out for my client. It's kind of weird how that happens.
And so with an international, like you were mentioning, people from other countries, if you hear sounds, are there any language barriers?
No.
If they don't speak English?
No, that's never, I really can't even understand. But the people who have come to me when I've, like I recently had someone from Africa who grew up in Africa, and then the person came through and I heard like the rattle of a gourd, that was used for music. But in terms of the speaking to me, it was totally, for me, English, yeah. It's a great question, though.
And do you think there's a physical difference in your brain that allows this to happen, or is it something else?
Wow, I hadn't thought about that. I think it's something else. I think we're all born intuitive, and I think the Western culture smashes it out of men first. Baby boys are taught not to have a lot of access to their intuitive self. And then I think as we grow up, we learn to doubt a lot of our intuition. So I think we all have the capacity to be more intuitive than we are. And I think as far as people like myself, I think that there's a sensitivity some of us are just born with. And we can either clamp it down or we can ask that it be expanded. Because for me, it's still a muscle that's being exercised and learned. The more I do readings, the easier the work is in some ways. And when I first started, there was more doubt. like, oh, should I say what I'm seeing? And then I learned just say it, even though it sounds nuts.
And I guess just generally, how do you think this sort of works? Like, when someone dies, do they go someplace that we can actually... Do they physically go somewhere, or like can we?
Are they just hanging around?
Right.
Like, yeah, it's a great question. So, I think we go somewhere, but I don't presume to imagine what it's like. Sylvia Browne passed away a while ago, about a year ago, and she's written a lot of books about what she thinks. Like, she thinks we all live in condominiums on the other side, but that's what Sylvia Browne might have wanted for herself when she crossed over. You know, I feel like my brother's in spirit. He died at 34. My mom's in spirit. She passed away in 2001, and now my dad. And my images, they're all at the Angel Cafe, drinking coffee. I grew up in a family that loved to dance, and they're all dancing. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it makes me feel good. But where do we go? I think there is a place that we go. I think we do have a literal place, but I have no clue what it really is like. You know, and I've read a lot of books, like a lot of people do, and every psychic has a different take on what that looks like. You know, have you seen the movie? Probably not. Defending Your Life. Mm-hmm. It's an old Meryl Streep movie, so it's on Netflix. And so the movie is about where you go, the in-between place you go after you pass away, before you go on to the next place. So you guys might want to watch it. It's there's a really funny scene in there. It's not her best, greatest movie, but it's funny. So if you watch it, remember I said there's a really funny scene in there in the cafeteria when she's hanging out. Like I always say, I want to eat French fries. I mean, I doubt we really eat food up there. I think it was the longing for French fries that brought me back to my body, so I incarnated.
I guess I'm just more curious. You mentioned quantum physics. How does that play into this?
Well, I remember reading the Seth books. They came out in the 1980s, late 70s and early 80s, by a woman named Jane Roberts, who's since passed away. And she talked about how the past, present, and future are all occurring at the same time. And I was trying to wrap my brain around it. I was in my late 20s then. And so I feel like you fast forward to the 21st century, and quantum physics talks about that kind of stuff. You know, so for me, when people say, what if someone's incarnated, how can you read my mother? I really do believe that there's still a part of that essence that we have, that in my relationship to like my mother, she's still my mom. She might have incarnated in another life, but there's still a part of her that's in that time zone, for want of a better term to kind of articulate this, where she still relates to Suzanne as her daughter, and she's still my mom. So for me, I think quantum physics comes the closest to kind of explaining the mysteries of time travel and wormhole, you know, all these things that we're all so fascinated by and are really hard to kind of wrap our heads around. I think the human race is arrogant to think we're the only thing going, you know, and in terms of, you know, my spiritual teacher is Amma. She's called the Hugging Saint, and she's Hindu. She doesn't want me to become a Hindu. You know, she tours the world 10 months out of the year, and she got the Gandhi King Award for United Nations for her humanitarian and peace work in the world, and she'll be back in the Bay Area in June. And, you know, she says if it's someone's karma to be poor, it's our dharma or our duty to help them. So I believe we incarnate. I believe we come back. And I think that the ability to tune into people's people while they're in this incarnation, I think, is a gift for healing. I mean, that's really how I see it. It's not a parlor trick. I've done parties, you know, where people have hired me to sit in a room and read people, and, you know, they've been very serious about it, but I don't do a lot of that because it's tiring. I'd rather do an hour reading than a few 15-minute readings, you know. It's kind of how I see it, but I've digressed off your question. So this is the sheet I give to people. I believe in empowering my clients, and since I have been a therapist for a long time, there's a lot of resources out there. So I give them this 2-page document with books, websites, and other healers to go to for their growth. Because if you have constant relationship problems, then you need other help besides a psychic reading. So I have books on the list and people to go to for healing, because I feel like that's such an important thing to give to people. So yeah, you can have a copy of that too.
Thank you.
So I wrote this book originally back after my brother Richie died. As I mentioned earlier, he passed away during the beginning of the AIDS pandemic in 1986. He was 34 and he was working for Walt Disney. He was in charge of the home video department. It was a brand new industry. So I put together my thoughts about my journey through my grief of his loss and put it together and started marketing the manuscript in 1991. And I landed an agent, and the AIDS crisis was still pretty heavy duty then. It was right before they discovered the cocktail, which helped people to get, to maintain their health longer. So 14 publishers rejected me, loved my writing, but unknown person memoir about AIDS, not a big seller. So fast forward to 2005 when I had the reading where Spirit came through with this woman, where her Irish dad came through. And it was about, so actually I'm jumping ahead. So in 1994, I was at my computer one day and I heard a voice in my head, and it was my brother. And he began talking to me through the computer. And that's the back part of my book. It's my conversations with my brother in spirit. And I often feel like the book wasn't really meant to be sold earlier, because what happened in that year when I began to have conversations with Richie changed the whole tenor of this book. Because it became a book not just about my childhood growing up in New York. I'm gay, my brother was gay, and what our childhood was like. But it also became a book about hope. After someone crosses over, that you can still be in touch with them. So the last chapter is... a couple of the last chapters are Richie's words in spirit, and then there's a chapter right at the very end of the book where I was working with a teenager as a therapist whose grandmother had passed away, and just dealing with this kid's grief. It wasn't a psychic thing, it was just my work as a grief counselor. So that's what the book's about.